Welcome back to the Organized Crime News Weekly podcast. My name is Key Vidati, and this is the show where we bring you the most up-to-date news on the global criminal underworld. Before I start, I just wanted to remind you to like, share, and subscribe. Any support helps. Thank you very much. All right, for our first story this week, we are going to a place that I didn't think I would ever really touch on. It's in Sri Lanka, the small island country off the coast of India. And this concerns a gang leader and drug trafficker by the name of, I'm sorry if I mispronounced this name, Sanjeewa Kumara Samararatne. And he was shot dead inside a courthouse, and he was shot dead by a gunman disguised as a lawyer who shot him with a revolver that was hidden in a hollowed-out book. And this gun was supposedly smuggled in by a female accomplice who is still on the run, but she has been identified as Pinpura Dewaj Ishara Sawandi. The gunman escaped the courthouse, but he was apprehended soon after, and Samararatne was shot at close range as he entered the courtroom. He had been in custody since September 2023 and was a suspect in several murder investigations. And after the shooting, a police officer and a man driving a van were arrested, and they are also suspected of aiding the shooter and the woman. But I thought this story was interesting because I honestly can say I know very little to nothing about the Sri Lankan underworld. But from what I've been reading, apparently this is one of several murders that have already occurred in Sri Lanka this year alone relating to gangland violence. Okay, and our next story concerns a man who I touched on in a couple episodes ago, Jos Leijdekkers, the Dutch cocaine kingpin. He was sentenced to 13 years in Belgium for a failed €250 million cocaine heist. And for those who don't remember, Jos Leijdekkers is the Dutch drug lord who was discovered to be hiding out in Sierra Leone just a few weeks ago in West Africa. And he is rumored to have forged close ties with the Sierra Leonean president and is rumored to be in a relationship with the president's daughter, and the Netherlands are actively seeking to extradite him. As well as the 13-year sentence he's just obtained, he was already convicted previously last year of cocaine trafficking and planning a murder, and was sentenced to 24 years for that, and he was also sentenced to 10 years last fall for assault. This recent sentence relates to when he supposedly directed an armed team to retrieve cocaine from a shipping container filled with soybeans back in October of 2023. But unbeknownst to Leijdekkers and his men, the shipment had already been discovered and had been moved to a secured warehouse. The team hired by Leijdekkers tracked the shipment to the warehouse using trackers, but were promptly arrested. 7 men in total were arrested, and they were each sentenced to 10 years. Leijdekkers was implicated as the mastermind behind this plot prior to it being carried out, and was further implicated by wiretapped prison conversations between the arrested men. The Leijdekkers still has to be arrested and sent back to the Netherlands from Sierra Leone to face any justice for this sentence or any of the other sentences he's obtained. We shall see what the future holds for Leijdekkers, but I will be sure to touch on it when there's another update to be had. Okay, and our next story concerns a group I touched on a couple weeks ago, the Colombian cocaine trafficking organization Clan del Golfo. This past week, the Colombian National Police killed 6 members of Clan del Golfo in a raid in Antioquia, which is a prominent cocaine trafficking region in Colombia, and this occurred on February 22nd. The police were aided by intelligence provided from US and UK agencies. Among the dead was Oliverio Isaza Gomez, also known as Terror, who was 50 years old. And a little bit of background on Terror: he was the son of Ramon Isaza Arango, who was the co-founder of the Autodefensas Unidas de Colombia, or AUC. And I touched on the AUC in that episode, and that they were a paramilitary organization sponsored by the Colombian government to go after the leftist guerrilla organization, the FARC. But they also dabbled in cocaine trafficking before they were dismantled in 2006. But Terror was one of the most influential figures of Clan del Golfo, and he was the leader of the group in the Magdalena Medio area. And as well as cocaine trafficking, he was involved in illegal mining and extortion. He was one of Colombia's most wanted criminals, and he had 33 separate warrants out for his arrest, which included 30 charges of forced disappearance, murder, and recruitment of minors. And Terror has been involved in crime since the age of 15 when he joined his father's paramilitary. He demobilized along with his father in 2006 and then served an 8-year prison sentence. After he was released in 2016, he tried to rebrand himself as a social leader, but obviously he went right back to crime. And since his death last week, members of Clan del Golfo in towns once controlled by him have released pamphlets ordering residents to place purple bows on doors and buildings in memory of Terror, and they've also ordered businesses in the towns to shut down. But I think this goes to show how entrenched these Colombian paramilitary/criminal organizations are in Colombian society. They have managed to infiltrate towns throughout the jungles of Colombia where they terrorize the local populations and extort them. But I doubt that Terror's death will have any meaningful impact on Clan del Golfo. They are a very decentralized organization. So if one leader of one cell gets killed, another member of that cell will just take over, and there's plenty of other cells throughout Colombia to support this cell. So I don't think this will impact Clan del Golfo in the long run. All right, our next story comes straight from Turkey. Former Turkish police officer Mustafa Selman, who was the brother of ex-Ankara Deputy Police Chief Hussein Selman, and Ankara is the capital of Turkey. But Mustafa Selman has been accused of helping the Comanchero Outlaw Motorcycle Gang launder money through real estate deals, as well as securing Turkish citizenship for a Comanchero member who was an internationally wanted fugitive. The Comanchero Motorcycle Gang is an Australian-based outlaw motorcycle gang. They were formed in the 1960s, and since then they have spread throughout the world to places such as Spain, Turkey, obviously, Balkans, Russia, and they've become heavily involved in the international meth trade, working with drug cartels in Southeast Asia to flood Australia and that part of the world with meth. And the drug trade in Australia is said to be the most profitable in the world. But the accusations against Selman come after 66 members of the Comancheros were recently indicted in Turkey for drug trafficking and money laundering, and they face a combined total of 262 years in prison. The most notable accused of these men is Hakan Ayik, who is one of the top Comancheros in the world. He's originally from Australia, and he's said to be worth more than $1 billion, and he was once described as Australia's most wanted man. He is alleged to have laundered millions of dollars through 2 tourism companies he set up in Turkey. Ayik was arrested in Istanbul in November of 2023. And Selman is alleged to have arranged for Maximilian Rivkin to obtain Turkish citizenship under the name of Sem Sansu. Sorry if I mispronounced that name. And Rivkin is a Swedish-based Comanchero member of Serbian origin who fled to Turkey. He is wanted by both Sweden and the United States after he was indicted back in 2021 in the Southern District of California, and he was charged with conspiracy to participate in a racketeering enterprise. And this came after the encrypted platform Anum was infiltrated by the FBI back in 2018. Encrypted communication platforms are the new way for organized crime figures around the world to communicate, where they think that they are having anonymous conversations, but every once in a while these platforms are hacked. And this is just one of the examples. And it was discovered that Rivkin's address and phone number were registered under Selman's name in Turkey's identity database. And Turkey, in general, in recent years, has become a place, along with Dubai, where criminals on the run from authorities, they can flee to places like Turkey and Dubai, and the local authorities will let them continue to operate as long as they don't cause any chaos in their countries. And Turkey in particular is thought to have a very corrupt government that is in league with a lot of organized crime figures, and this goes all the way back decades, these allegations. And as well as that, Turkey offers citizenship to individuals who are willing to pay, I don't know the exact figure, but it's close to $1 million. And this has been very attractive to a lot of internationally wanted criminal figures. And it's also thought that Turkey is becoming the new top destination for wanted organized crime figures throughout the world, since Dubai is rumored to be trying to clean its image due to its very well-earned reputation of harboring these wanted criminals and allowing them to continue to operate. Okay, and our final story this week is pretty shocking to me for all the famous names involved in this story. But 29 different Mexican cartel leaders were extradited to the United States this past week. Obviously, this comes in the wake of the U.S. declaring the major Mexican drug cartel organizations to be terrorist organizations, so this provides them a lot more power to go after them. But as I said, many prominent cartel leaders were brought to the United States to face justice this past week, and I'm just going to profile 3 of the most prominent ones. The first one is Miguel Trevino Morales, also known as Z40. He is the former leader of Los Zetas. Los Zetas was formed in the 2000s. They used to be the enforcement wing of the Gulf Cartel, but in the 2000s they split off, and they were mainly made up of ex-Mexican special forces, and they became notorious for some of the most savage and brutal cartel massacres that Mexico has ever seen. And Trevino Morales was leading Los Zetas when they committed most of these atrocities. Trevino Morales is alleged to be responsible for the murder of 72 undocumented immigrants back in 2010 and the massacre of 193 innocent civilians back in 2011. Los Zetas became very famous for invading towns throughout northeast Mexico and terrorizing the local population and sending messages to the Mexican government by executing large numbers of innocent civilians. Trevino Morales was arrested back in July of 2013, and ever since then he was languishing inside a Mexican jail. But he has finally, after almost 12 years, been extradited to the United States, along with his brother Omar Trevino Morales, who took over Los Zetas after the arrest of Miguel. And while in prison, Miguel Trevino Morales is alleged to have formed the Cartel del Noreste organization, which is now one of the top Mexican drug cartels. And this came after the fragmentation of Los Zetas. Los Zetas no longer exists as a single entity and is fractured into many different groups. And Miguel and his brother Omar are alleged to have formed the Cartel del Noreste, or Northeast Cartel in English, but they have obviously been dealt a heavy blow with the extradition of their 2 leaders. Another prominent figure of these cartel leaders that's been extradited is Vicente Carrillo Fuentes, who was the leader of the Juarez cartel. Vicente was the younger brother of Amado Carrillo Fuentes, who formed the Juarez cartel back in the 80s, and in the 1990s was considered the top drug trafficker in Mexico. And Amado would die in 1997 after trying to get plastic surgery to alter his face in order to avoid arrest. And since then, Vicente has been the leader of the Juarez cartel. And the Juarez cartel became embroiled in a war with the powerful Sinaloa cartel in 2004 after Vicente's brother Rodolfo Carrillo was murdered, and the Sinaloa cartel and the Juarez cartel fought a war for the next few years for control of Juarez, and this war led to Juarez being the murder capital of the world for a few years. And it also saw the Juarez cartel greatly weakened as the Sinaloa cartel gained dominance in Juarez. But Vicente was arrested back in October of 2014, and he was sentenced to 28 years in prison by a Mexican court. But this has not stopped him from being extradited to the United States, and he pleaded not guilty in a Brooklyn, New York courthouse to running a criminal enterprise. And the most notable name of these figures is Rafael Caro Quintero, who for those who have seen Narcos Mexico, he was one of the main characters in that show. He pleaded not guilty in the same Brooklyn courthouse to running a criminal enterprise and for the murder of DEA agent Enrique Kiki Camarena, which occurred back in 1985. A little bit of background on Caro Quintero. He started out as a marijuana grower in the 1970s before partnering with Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo and others to form the Guadalajara Cartel, and he is alleged to be responsible for the kidnapping and murder of DEA agent Kiki Camarena, as I mentioned previously. He was arrested later in 1985 in Costa Rica, and he was extradited back to Mexico, where he was sentenced to 40 years for his role in this murder. But in August of 2013, he was released on a technicality after he had been in prison for 28 years. Despite having served time in Mexico for the murder of Camarena in 2015, he was charged by American authorities for his role in the kidnapping and murder of Camarena. And for those who are unaware, the murder of Kiki Camarena is considered a pivotal moment in the history of Mexican drug trafficking, and this is said to be where the United States started to focus more on tackling Mexican drug cartels. This was the first time that an American law enforcement agent was murdered in Mexico. But going back to Caro Quintero after he was released in 2013, later in 2019 he formed the Caborca Cartel, and Caborca is a town in the Mexican state of Sonora, and Sonora borders Arizona, and he went to war with the Sinaloa Cartel for control of drug trafficking operations in the state of Sonora. But the Sinaloa Cartel is the most powerful drug trafficking organization in Mexico, and Caro Quintero stood no chance. The Caborca Cartel was greatly weakened, and Caro Quintero was captured once again in July of 2022. This is a pretty historic moment, as he is considered one of the founding fathers of Mexican drug trafficking, and the U.S. government has been waiting to prosecute him for 40 years now for the murder of Kiki Camarena. So this should be very interesting to see what will happen. I don't expect that he will get off on these charges. I don't expect any of these three men that I mentioned to be found not guilty. The United States federal court system has something like a 99% conviction rate, so I don't think their chances are very good. There are even rumors that prosecutors are seeking the death penalty for some of these men, so that remains to be seen, but the future is not looking good for any of these cartel leaders. Okay, that's going to do it for this week's edition of Organized Crime News Weekly. Thank you so much for tuning in. I will be back next week with a new exciting edition covering all the crazy events going on in the global underworld. Thank you so much for tuning in.